Albert Einstein once said,
"We can't solve problems by using the same level of consciousness that created them."
For a long time, I've been trying to escape oppressive systems without realizing I'm still carrying its conditioning. I was programmed into ideas around how to create revolutionary change that were indistinguishable from the systems responsible for the mess we're in. So I ended up replicating in my worldviews, values, frameworks, actions, and ways of being the exact same systems I sought to dismantle. Unfortunately, this is something I see time and time again in progressive people and movements. So today I want to explore how many of our revolutionary ideas are reproducing the same systems we claim to oppose. What deeper shifts in consciousness are required for real transformative change? And can any movement truly succeed if it doesn't break free from the frameworks it's trying to overthrow? In my videos, if I so much as mention Indigenous wisdom, people always accuse me of romanticizing, essentializing, or cannibalizing other cultures. If I mention psychedelics as plant allies, people claim it's unscientific. If I so much as hint at spirituality, people accuse me of promoting the opium of the masses. If I suggest it might be instructive to listen to the wisdom of our bodies, nature, our ancestors, people say it's hippy-dippy mumbo-jumbo. In all cases, it's assumed this is a distraction from the real revolutionary work at hand. And of course, I'm not saying accept all these things willy-nilly. They all, to varying degrees, deserve scrutiny and critique. And not everyone has to believe what I believe, different strokes for different folks. But I do worry that the rejection of these things often mirrors the very logic of white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. Wasn't denying the value of Indigenous knowledge central to the justification for colonialism and capitalist expansion? Didn't the medical-industrial complex discredit plant medicines and alternative healing practices to further its bottom line? Isn't the destruction of an animistic conception of nature necessary to justify pillage and plunder? Wasn't the mechanization of the body destroying the idea of the body as a receptacle of magical powers key to the generation of a capitalist workforce? Isn't it necessary for the exploitation of lands and peoples to value the scientific, rational, and logical over the heart, body, and spirit? Is it not a tool of oppression to fragment the world into separate categories, ecological, political, spiritual, rather than embracing a holistic, interconnected worldview? In other words, white supremacist capitalist patriarchy destroyed a whole universe of practices, beliefs, ways of being, and knowledge systems whose existence was a threat to economic order. Would it have been necessary to suppress these other ways of knowing and being if there wasn't something deeply subversive about them? Could our critiques inadvertently be replicating the same systems we take issue with? Far from being irrelevant, are these alternative ways of knowing a way of recovering what systems of oppression sought to erase? When I was at university, we got free career counselling in our final year, and I remember saying to my career counsellor, "Can you tell me what job makes the most difference in the world?" She looked a little bit disgruntled by the question, but at the time it was the most obvious thing in the world for me to be asking. I wanted whatever work I did to be the most meaningful work I could possibly do. Our inherited capitalist valuation says bigger is better. There's no time to be engaging in small, insignificant solutions. I needed to achieve something extraordinary. The hazard with this kind of mentality is that it can lead to a paralyzing grandiosity where it's tempting to conclude we have to do something massive or nothing at all. Like I used to neglect doing anything in my community because I was waiting around for some huge event or extraordinary action to get behind. Nothing in my immediate environment seemed significant enough to warrant my time or attention. But the reality is, most resistance is not huge, exceptional, or grand. Many of the most influential figures and huge revolutions were nurtured by the support of countless ordinary people who, through their strategies of everyday resistance, created a powerful foundation for the more visible activists and huge eruptions to thrive. As abolitionist Angela Davis wrote,
"It is essential to resist the depiction of history as the work of heroic individuals in order for people today to recognize their potential agency as part of an ever-expanding community of struggle."
Similarly, anarchist Peter Kropotkin wrote,
History, today a convenient mythology regarding the greatness of kings, of notable personalities, of parliaments, must be entirely recast from the popular point of view, from the viewpoint of the work accomplished by the masses in the phases of human revolution.
In our chase of grandiosity, we can often overlook the profound wisdom that can come from everyday people and our non-human allies. When I think about the things that have most impacted me, yes, it's famous people and influential books, but it's also friends, brief encounters with strangers, time spent in nature. When I get really passionate about animal liberation, for example, I often have in mind my childhood best friend, a little pig on our Austrian pig farm called Kleiner Schlingel, Little Rascal, before my grandparents slaughtered him for our dinner. To give maybe a more concrete example than my Kleiner Schlingel, years ago I read Nelson Mandela's autobiography, The Long Walk to Freedom, and I've forgotten almost everything in that book. But one thing that I will always remember is the way he talked about how influenced he was by this chief in his local village. Mandela admired his leadership skills, his respect, his non-hierarchical nature, his collaboration. This early experience with African leadership later influenced Mandela's approach to activism and governance. So who was ultimately more significant, Nelson Mandela or this long-forgotten man in a little African village who influenced the course of Mandela's work and life? I also think Mandela is indicative of just how much that which is celebrated and valorized is not a very good indication of its actual value. So many people who are considered history's most influential figures, like Mandela, were considered terrorists for a great portion of their lives. And many people held up as beacons of virtue are actually doing more harm than good. And not everyone has to do something grand or exceptional. Philosopher Ido Landau points out,
"We do not disapprove of a chair because it cannot be used to boil water for a nice cup of tea.
And likewise,
it is implausible for almost all people to demand of themselves that they be a Michelangelo, a Mozart, or an Einstein. There have only been a few dozen such people in the entire history of humanity."
Similarly, we don't need to be super exceptional at something for it to be valuable that we contribute.
Use what talents you possess. The woods would be very silent if no birds sang there except those that sang best.
So if we're feeling purposeless and directionless, could it be that we've adopted a standard of meaningful contribution nobody could realistically be expected to achieve? Could we consider the possibility that there might be a far wider variety of things that could qualify as meaningful ways to spend our time? What emerges for us when we get capitalistic, scale-based success metrics out of the way? White supremacist capitalist patriarchy teaches us that if we don't work hard, nothing will get done. The harder we work, the greater the reward. We elevate work that comes hard and denigrate work that comes easy. My distaste for these ideas doesn't come from laziness or passivity, but because I believe, like Adrienne Marie Brown and Robin Wall Kimmerer, that each person, like every element in an ecosystem, plays a unique and essential role for the well-being and functioning of our communities. We all have our unique interests, skills, and passions. We long for meaning, to contribute something significant. We want to give our gifts to this world. I believe this work is an unparalleled joy when it goes well, work we are willing to organize our lives around, and that the quality of our lives is based in part on how well we are able to do it. It's a kind of love for labor that makes the process fulfilling beyond monetary rewards or external validation. This is why I believe poet and writer Audre Lorde wrote, "We must find our work and do it." And the civil rights theologian and mentor to Dr. Martin Luther King, Howard Thurman, taught,
Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive. And go do that, because what the world needs is people who have come alive.
And Viktor Frankl, after surviving Auschwitz, concluded that humanity's fundamental drive is towards meaning.
But normally, fundamentally, originally, primarily, basically, any human being is concerned with something out there in the world, is concerned with someone out there in the world, a work to do, a job to complete, a task, a meaning, a mission in life waiting for him exclusively to be materialized, to be actualized by him and by no other person. Right now, who else if not he? And finally, this he doesn't do for himself, but he's doing it for the sake of a cause to serve, or another person to love, and not and never for himself only.
So rather than reinforcing a prescriptive blueprint of revolutionary action as relentless, arduous work, I want movements where we are encouraged to look within and ask, why am I here? What am I hungry to get involved in? What makes me come alive? Of course, that doesn't mean it's all going to be hunky-dory, but for people who are connected to a meaning and a purpose, hard work comes easy. As philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote,
"He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how."
And author Sebastian Junger, in a book about soldiers who returned to war despite having PTSD, found that people wanted to return to war zones because they were connected to solidarity, meaning, and purpose. And whilst I'm generally anti-war and anti-military, I find Junger's reflections instructive.
Humans don't mind hardship. In fact, they thrive on it. What they mind is not feeling necessary.
How much more of an abundant message would it be if instead of exalting everyone to do the same things, we instead said to people, decide what is sacred to you and put your life energies at its service? What have you wanted to do, create, or say that you've given up on in the name of perceived duty? Dare you to only do work that gives you a palpable sense of meaning, contribution, and purpose? I want to end this section of the video with the words of psychologist Bill Plotkin.
There's so much more to who you are than you know right now. You are indeed something mysterious and something magnificent. You hold within you, secreted for safekeeping in your heart, a great gift for this world. Although you might sometimes feel like a cog in a huge machine, they don't really matter in the great scheme of things. The truth is that you are fully eligible for a meaningful life, a mystical life, a life of the greatest fulfillment and service.
When I was doing my master's and involved in some student occupations, I would always pedestal these charismatic men in our movements. They would usually be quite serious, solemn, and sacrificial, like the classic martyr archetype. But most of them aren't even politically involved anymore, or even have progressive ideals. Motivated more by the classic great man theory of history, white male savior complex, and hero narrative, it ultimately proved to be unsustainable. So these days I'm often wondering, what if we embraced the trickster instead? Unlike the perfectionism and rigidity of the martyr, the trickster has an experimental, flexible approach to social change. Okay, that didn't work, no worries. What can we learn from that? How can we grow from this?
Try again. Fail again. Fail better.
Rather than seeing the world as all doom and gloom, the trickster adopts the attitude of Joanna Macy, who sees this period of history as the essential adventure of our time.
If you want an adventure, boy, what a time to choose to be alive, to get a chance to find out what you have inside you in terms of vitality and alertness and courage, what you have to discover in terms of what we can do together.
Rather than seeing revolution as a perpetual duty, struggle, and sacrifice, the trickster says, fuck it, I'm going to enjoy myself anyway.
There's something beautiful about being on fire for justice. Ooh, it's a beautiful thing. Well, in a culture of fleeting pleasures, it's so magnificent to have enduring joys. You got to find joy in serving others. You got to find joy in being willing to make sacrifices and take a risk. A lot of people tell you, oh, Brother West, it must be so lonely and marginal. You're trying to speak the truth. I don't have the full truth, but I'm having a good time.
Unlike the practicality and rationality of the martyr, the trickster embraces craziness, madness, ridiculousness. Someone on the Discord shared this quote just at the perfect time for this video. It's from Marxist revolutionary Thomas Sankara.
You cannot carry out fundamental change without a certain amount of madness. In this case, it comes from non-conformity, the courage to turn your back on the old formulas, the courage to invent the future. It took the madmen of yesterday for us to be able to act with extreme clarity today. I want to be one of those madmen.
Instead of the seriousness and solemnity of the martyr, the trickster embraces silliness, playfulness, and pranks to challenge the absurdity of it all. Historian Vine Deloria wrote in Indian Humour that indigenous humour and laughter has such a prominent place in national affairs that nothing would get done without it. The more dire the situation, the more humour that is used to describe it. So maybe we need less martyrdom, more mischief, less solemnity, more insanity, less perfection, more play. In the face of personal or political challenges, perhaps it could be instructive to ask, what would the trickster do? For anyone who's as curious and interested in the trickster as I am, our next Patreon book club will be on Lewis Hyde's Trickster Makes the World Go Round, and our next community call will be all about revolutions and our ideas around revolutions, and are our ideas completely off? And in general, I'm trying to live a little bit trickstery at the moment, trying to create art, do meaningful work, make these videos. So I'd really appreciate if anyone could consider becoming a patron to help me live my little trickster life in whatever way I can and continue to make these videos. Sometimes it feels so tempting to conclude that nothing I've ever done matters very much because I've barely seen the fruits of my labours. We have these colonial capitalistic linear progress narratives where change is expected to unfold predictably, moving from one state to a better one like clockwork. But the truth is, progress is neither linear nor predictable. Sometimes revolutions spring up in a season, take over a patch of land, flourish, and then are gone when winter comes. Sometimes progress is mostly unseen, underground. Only when it has developed strong roots do we see wild and explosive growth as if from nowhere, its deep roots giving it lasting power. Other changes occur from wayward seeds blown elsewhere in the wind. The seeds of progress are often sown in small, unknown ways, but are an essential part of the larger process. What we practice at the small scale sets the pattern for the whole system. Author Grace Lee Boggs articulated this as,
transform yourself to transform the world.
sometimes progress is plodding along so slowly that it feels like we're not getting anywhere until we reach a tipping point.
The tipping point is that magic moment when an idea, trend, or social behavior crosses a threshold, tips, and spreads like wildfire.
Revolution is rarely a singular event, but a series of incremental, seemingly disconnected events laying the groundwork for mass transformation.
Revolutionary change does not come as one cataclysmic moment, but as an endless succession of surprises moving zigzag toward a more decent society.
Often it's impossible to see all the progress we're making because we're so up close we can't see the forest for the trees.
The present moment was not as transient or fugitive as most people assumed. It was simply unfathomable, too dense with potentiality.
And perhaps our minds could not possibly fathom what is to come because it's so unimaginable and ridiculous. I love the way author Rebecca Solnit put it in A Field Guide to Getting Lost.
People look into the future and expect that the forces of the present will unfold in a coherent and predictable way. But any examination of the past reveals that the circuitous routes of change are unimaginably strange. No logic and no prophecy could explain the evolution of the whale from an ancient aquatic creature through eons on land and then back into the sea to become something utterly different from anything that could survive on the surface of the earth.
So whilst we can never presume to know that what we do will bear any fruit, does that mean it's all futile? What if the real impact of our actions is indirect, unexpected, or happens long after we are gone? What if the significance of our actions lies not in immediate results, but in the unseen ripples we create over time? What if the seeds we plant today create a future far greater than we could possibly imagine? For a long time in my videos, I'd constantly perpetuate this narrative that the world has so many problems, we're running out of time, we need to act now. Indoctrinated into a capitalist efficiency, productivity, scarcity-based mindset, I wanted to push people to act by highlighting the urgency of the crisis. Contrast this with the attitude of a doggone tribal elder Charles Eisenstein references in The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, who, when asked if he feels urgency to combat environmental issues, despite knowing the gravity of the situation, responded with,
You don't understand. Urgency isn't something we have here.
what I take this to mean is not that we should be passive and do nothing at all, but that it's a little like Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's concept of flow. When we're in a state of flow, there's no need for urgency, goading, guilting ourselves to act. We have this feeling of rightness and alignment that action comes naturally. We barely have to think about it, it just flows through us. When we're not in flow mode, no matter how much we might cajole ourselves to take action, we barely make any progress at all. But given enough time, rest, and spaciousness, the feeling of flow returns if we're on the right path. So instead of relentless urgency, it's about trusting the flow, the unstoppable impulse to act in wiser ways than we could possibly imagine will emerge when the time is right.
Don't let urgency deprive you of the capacity to let life through in the biggest doorway of your being.
I like to think of flow as the feeling that comes when we're a conduit for something other to channel through us. Our portal opens, our antenna links up, and we receive transmissions from our internal guidance systems, our souls, our dreams, ancestors, nature, whatever floats your boat. Relentless urgency doesn't allow us to feel the flow, to stop to listen, to receive transmissions. George Bernard Shaw's play St. Joan depicts Joan of Arc, whose visions and voices inspired her to lead the armed revolt against English occupation in 15th century France.
Oh, your voices, your voices. Why don't the voices come to me? I am king, not you.
Joan replies,
They do come to you, but you do not hear them. You have not sat in the field in the evening listening for them. When the Angelus rings, you cross yourself and have done with it. But if you had prayed from your heart and listened to the thrilling of the bells in the air after they stop ringing, you would hear the voices as well as I do.
so what are the voices we've silenced in our relentless urgency? What might we have learnt if we stopped to be still and follow the feeling of aliveness, brightness, the flow? Where would we be if we were a conduit for that which wanted to flow through us to manifest? In a lot of my earlier videos, I was stuck in critique mode, tearing everything down. I conceived of the world as pure bad news, appointed myself as the preacher of it, and kept telling it over and over. Don't get me wrong, radical critique is an indispensable weapon. It's crucially important. If you see yourself as a critical theorist, that's great. But when we are stuck in critique mode, might we be upholding the very status quo we seek to challenge? This was the point humanist Thomas More was making when he wrote in Utopia.
Presenting views at odds with the norm, the critic begins at a disadvantage. He or she is a perpetual outsider, always operating from the margins, trying to convince people that what they know as the truth might be false, and what they hold to be reality is just one perspective among many. This marginal position not only renders persuasion more difficult, but, paradoxically, reinforces the centrality of the norm. The margins, by very definition, are bound to the center, and the critic, in their act of criticism, reinscribes the importance of the world they take issue with.
How many ardent revolutionaries have we lost due to despair and burnout from constant critique?
He who fights too long against dragons becomes a dragon himself. And if you gaze too long into the abyss will gaze into you.
And if we are only ever tearing down, never building, are we in danger of ceding ground to be co-opted by other groups? As was the case in the 1930s when, in psychologist Erich Fromm's explanation, people traded in their newfound freedom from religion, work and money troubles to join the Nazi regime, because although they received a freedom from oppression, they didn't receive freedom to engage with the world in a new, radical way. So I think it's crucially important that we focus not just on what we're fighting against, but also what we're moving towards, strengthening our capacity to envision and create. As the theorist Bell Hooks talks about, imagination is one of the most powerful tools in the hands of the oppressed. Afrofuturism and solar punk are literary, artistic, political movements that give us visions of liberatory futures. Sonia Renee Taylor came up with the concept of VCR theory, that no one had to go about critiquing and tearing down VCRs. Some people just went about inventing and creating and envisioning something better, and people naturally switched. Sonia says, let's stop fighting a dying world and instead set about creating the new one. But for me personally, my favourite way to conceptualise what we're moving towards, I borrow from Charles Eisenstein, who says it's less about creating a vision and more about receiving a vision. A vision comes to us, and it is our job to be the best vessel for that thing to manifest. We bow into stewardship to that which wants to be born. This is what works best for me, but we're all so different, so my point is simply to say, if we're stuck in critique mode, might we be inadvertently replicating the same system we seek to dismantle? What would it look like to shift from only fighting against to building the world we desire? How can we harness our imaginations and visions to create a world that liberates us, rather than just reacting to the one we're trying to escape? As you might have gathered by now, I love questions. I actually collect questions. Some people collect shells, some people collect stamps. I just like to collect questions. And I made a Patreon blog all about my all-time favorite questions I like to ask myself and some of my answers to the questions in case anyone would like to check that out. I used to fetishize suffering as solidarity with the oppressed. I felt like positivity was bougie. If I wasn't depressed, I wasn't fighting hard enough against injustice. I felt joy was a way of ignoring the realities of the world. Now, on the other hand, I've come to believe that the powers that be want us to settle for suffering because, as Audre Lorde pointed out, when we start to truly get in touch with deep feeling, joy and wonder, we begin by necessity to give up on settling for suffering and numbness. It gives us energy to pursue change. This isn't about toxic positivity or bypassing our negative emotions. It's about holding both at the same time. Sonia Renee Taylor said this better than I ever could.
If I am willing to let the fullness of the pain inspire me, how dare I not let the fullness of the joy do the same? How dare I not let in with equal measure that which is abundant, which is gorgeous, which is rich, which is the evidence of human connection, which is the evidence of our love, which is the evidence of our resilience, which is the evidence of our connection, which is the evidence of our ability to circumnavigate the systems of oppression and to live into a richer, fuller being with ourselves and one another. How dare I not allow myself to as powerfully embody those moments as well?
Adrienne Marie Brown, who talks about making our movements so irresistible people can't help but to join, conceives of social systems as fractals. What we practice on the small scale impacts the large scale. We won't be able to claim joy, liberation and freedom on a large scale if we're not in the habit of practicing it in our bodies, within ourselves and our movements. The micro ripples out into the macro. People often assume we can't live like that because nothing will get done, but I want to reiterate what I said in my video on radical rest because it bears repeating. Friendships, celebrations, play, dance, fun and rest have formed the core of resistance and communities in indigenous cultures for centuries. Is this just another case where the civilized West, with our notions of progress, clocks and scarcity-based thinking, knows better? Could it be that the solutions to our problems can't be found in the modes of beings, values and norms that we, the West, are accustomed to? Is there perhaps something vital and indispensable that can be learnt from, as Martin Prechtel put it, recovering our indigenous soul? And I will admit it can be tempting to say, well, other people can experience joy, but my life is too shit, my trauma's too big. And whilst I don't want to make anyone feel bad for feeling bad, I do take inspiration from Viktor Frankl, who found that even in the conditions of Auschwitz, people still found moments of joy.
There's an extraordinary moment in Man's Search for Meaning where you talk about being in one of the Nazi camps and all of you going out to look at a sunset. Is that
exactly? This is a paradigm of experiential values, of finding a meaning in experiencing without doing anything, without achieving or accomplishing anything, but just in giving oneself to the immediate experience of something, say, beautiful going on in the world.
So if we've been conditioned to equate suffering with solidarity, might we be playing into the hands of those who benefit from our misery? Do we dare to get in touch with allowing into our lives the wonders of this world? Could it be that true revolution begins not just with resisting oppression, but embracing joy, beauty, and pleasure right here, right now? So the core of what I've been trying to get at in this video is that we're coming at revolution with the same level of consciousness that created the problems in the first place. We are deeply programmed into the same values, worldviews, paradigms, and ways of being, reenacting again and again the same kind of solutions that brought us to this current extremity. It's only by transcending that programming, habits of thought, belief, and doing, and their accompanying conceptions of revolution, that we can expect to create anything other than a further intensification of that which we are experiencing today. So with love and self-compassion, perhaps we can self-investigate. What ideas around how to create revolution are a product of my indoctrination into this culture and not the truth? Where am I reproducing the values and paradigms systems of oppression have assigned to us? How do I continue to bring that way of being into focus and choose every day to operate from a different lens? I would love to hear your responses to these questions and anything else that came up for you whilst watching this video. As I said, I'd really appreciate if you could consider to become a patron to help me to continue making these videos that take a lot of time, energy, and effort. Thank you so much to my current patrons for helping to make this channel possible. I couldn't do it without you. I appreciate you so much, and I hope you have a beautiful day. Bye!